She'd lived in the little cottage on Pinegrove Lane for barely a month when the nights began to change. It started one evening in late October. The wind had just picked up, rattling the thin panes of her kitchen window as she washed dishes, humming an old lullaby to herself. She glanced through the glass at the moon-dappled yard beyond, trimmed hedges and overgrown lawn bathed in milky light. Then she saw it, a single, dark silhouette crouched at the edge of the tree-line. She froze, soap-slick hands hovering above the sink. When her eyes adjusted, it wasn't a person, but something hunched and impossibly still. She blinked. It was gone. The next night, the power flickered out just as she was about to drift to sleep. Frustrated, she slipped on a robe and crept outside to reset the breaker in the little shed at the back. The air was cold, sticky with the promise of rain. As she passed the garden plot, she felt the hairs on her neck prickle. A faint scratching noise came from the compost heap. She froze. "Hello," she called, voice trembling. No reply, only that soft, wet scratching like something digging free. She edged closer. Moonlight glinted off a small metal object half buried in the soil. Kneeling, she brushed away mud. A tarnished key, its tooth crooked and knife-sharp, stared back at her. She shivered, slipping it into her pocket and hurrying to the breaker box, wondering later why she couldn't summon the courage to look back. By the third night, her dreams were invaded by an echoing lullaby, sung in a voice oddly familiar and tinny, like an old music box. She'd wake gasping, her sheets tangled around her legs. Something heavy would thud against her bedroom window, then skitter away into the darkness. Fed up, she set up the motion-activated floodlight along the fence line. At 2:13 a.m., she was abruptly roused by a blaze of artificial white light followed by a strident snapping sound, like branches breaking. Heart pounding, she peered through the blinds. The yard was empty, but the floodlight illuminated dozens of footprints pressed into the dew-soaked grass, small, delicate prints, like a child's, but too deep, as if bearing weight far heavier than a little human should carry. Frozen, she counted them. They led from the back porch to the side gate, then vanished, as though whatever made them had simply floated away. That morning, she found the key on her bedside table. It was splayed out next to her phone, which lay face up, screen cracked. She didn't recall smashing it. The key's metal was ice cold, but her fingers itched with a memory she couldn't place. A lullaby, the scraping of nails, eyes glimmering in the dark. All day, she tried to work around it, tossing it into drawers, even sliding it into the garbage bin. Each time she returned, it was back on the nightstand, as if carried there by unseen hands. By dusk, she knew she had to stop pretending. Grabbing a flashlight and a pocket knife, she slipped into the backyard again. She stood before the compost heap, now turned to loose soil, where she'd first found the key. Kneeling, she brushed away the earth. At first, nothing. Then, her fingers struck cold metal. She unearthed a small latch embedded in the ground. Almost buried, its edges encrusted with rust, was a keyhole perfectly shaped for her crooked key. Her breath caught. She knelt lower, hesitated, then slid the tip of the key into the lock. It turned with a grinding click. The earth shuddered. A section of turf shifted, revealing a narrow hatch set into crude wooden beams. The hatch swung open on rotten hinges with a sound like bone splitting. A putrid draft rose from the darkness beyond, carrying the sickly sweet stench of decay. Heart hammering, she shone the flashlight into the hole. A ladder of slick metal rungs disappeared into blackness. She swallowed bile but climbed down. At the bottom, the beam of her light flickered across damp stone walls, carved with crude figures, children's faces distorted in silent screams, hands pressed flat against the rock as though begging to be pulled free. The tunnel smelled of rot and something fouler still, old blood. With each step, a faint melody drifted up, that same childish lullaby, tinny and warped. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves. She reached the tunnel's end, a low-ceilinged chamber. In its center, under a pool of faint luminescent mold, lay a row of broken music boxes, each one shattered, their mechanisms twisted. On top of the largest box sat a porcelain doll, its glassy eyes chipped and filled with dark resin. As she approached, the doll's head tilted. The lullaby grew louder. She blinked and was staring into a pair of hollow sockets, dripping something dark. A voice rasped behind her, "You found me." She spun. In the far corner, something crouched in shadow. Too small to be an adult, too crooked to be a child. Its joints knotted at wrong angles, skin hanging in loose folds. It rocked back and forth, humming the lullaby in a voice that cracked like old wood. "I've been so lonely," it whispered, limping forward. In its hand, it clutched another porcelain doll, one she recognized as her own, the one she'd left on the porch that morning. She sprinted back toward the ladder, but the hatch above had slammed shut. Scrabbling at the wooden door, panic clawed at her chest. The creature's humming grew frantic as it bounced toward her, each hop accompanied by a wet smack. She slid the blade of her pocket knife between the hatch and its frame, prying it upward. Her flashlight skidded down into the chamber, illuminating the creature's face one final time, half-formed, as if still burning in place, its features melting like candle wax. With a grunt, she forced the hatch open, pulling herself out into the cool night. She tumbled onto the grass, scrambled to her feet, and bolted for the house. Behind her, the hatch snapped shut with a final, echoing click, and silence fell. She called the police in the morning, but when they dug up the spot, they found only loose earth and a rusted handle leading to nothing. No hatch, no tunnel. The ground was smooth, as though it had never been disturbed. Yet every night since, she swears she hears that lullaby, drifting through her windows. And sometimes, when the streetlight flickers, she thinks she sees a small figure crouched just beyond the edge of her yard, rocking back and forth and waiting. She keeps the key now, tucked under her pillow. She doesn't know why. Maybe she thinks she can lock it away. Maybe she hopes the thing will come again, because somewhere deep down, she's afraid she wants it to. Mara first spotted him on a rainy Monday evening, crouched beneath the peeling porch light like a stray dog begging for scraps. He was barely knee-high, with mottled green skin that seemed to ripple when he moved, and eyes like polished onyx stones set too deeply in his skull. His ears jutted out at odd angles. His smile was all teeth and too wide for his narrow face. And yet, when Mara crouched to meet his gaze, he threw back his head and laughed, a tinkling, childlike sound that made her heart ache with strange pity. By the time she carried him inside, dripping mud onto her polished floors, she was already calling him Nix. He followed her from room to room, chirping happily whenever she set out a bowl of milk or a plate of warm bread. He curled up on the sofa, scooting close against her knee like a lapdog, and when she reached out to stroke the soft down covering his scalp, he let out a contented purr. "Mara," she whispered one night as she watched him sleep beneath her reading lamp, "you're the only friend I've had in years." Nix's eyelids fluttered open. His teeth flashed. He blinked slowly, as though setting her words somewhere deep in his mind. Then he closed his eyes again and drifted off. Friends stopped calling after a while. First it was Anna, who'd invited Mara and Nix to her apartment for wine and conversation. Anna smiled at the goblin. Mara's heart swelled with pride, until he skittered across the floor and perched on Anna's shoulder, chattering in his high, warped little voice. Anna laughed nervously and said, "He's unique?" She poured another glass of wine. Nix sniffed at Anna's neck, then hissed, a sound like steam escaping a kettle. Anna jerked away, her hand flying to the back of her neck, and Nix leapt to the coffee table, smashing her wine glass. The shards flew, and blood welled where Anna's skin had been nicked. She grabbed her purse and ran for the door. Mara called after her, heart pounding, but Anna was gone. Then it was Marcus, Mara's coworker and longtime crush. He brought takeout and his easy smile, and when he knelt down to greet Nix, all seemed well, until Nix's expression flicked from curiosity to contempt. Marcus brushed the change off with a laugh. "Oh, come on, he's just shy." Nix tilted his head, black eyes boring into Marcus's chest. Under the table, his gnarled fingers flexed until the knuckles cracked. Every time Marcus reached toward Mara for her hand, Nix shot him a glare so hostile that even Marcus stopped mid-reach. At midnight, Mara awoke to Marcus's muffled scream. She found him in the hallway, clutching his arm, where 3 neat puncture wounds oozed dark blood. Nix sat on the stairs above him, his grin impossibly wide. "You're mine," he whispered, voice low and vicious, "all mine." Marcus never came back. Neighbors began whispering about odd lights and scratching noises at the edge of Mara's yard. Doors rattled at night. Someone spray-painted a crude symbol on her front gate, a spiraling circle with jagged lines, like claws tearing outward. Nix watched from the window, head cocked, eyes bright with mischief. Mara tried once more to reach out to someone, her sister, Claire, inviting her for dinner. Over steaming bowls of pasta, Claire cooed at Nix, offered him a scrap of bread. He took it politely, then skittered behind Claire's chair. When she turned, he slammed his tiny fist into the back of her skull. She collapsed onto the floor, dazed, and Nix dug his claws into her shoulder as she tried to rise. Mara screamed and threw herself between them. Nix flung Claire away with inhuman strength. Claire fled in tears. Mara gathered her in the driveway, sobbing apologies. But Claire only shook her head. "Get rid of it, Mara," she breathed. "It's evil." That night, Mara carried Nix to the edge of the woods behind her house. He chirped and reached up, clutching her coat sleeve, his eyes huge and beseeching. She knelt and set him down. "You're a terrible friend," she whispered, voice shaking. "I can't do this anymore." But as she turned to walk away, a piercing wail split the air. Mara froze and looked back to see Nix growing, limbs elongating, spine arching, skin darkening to a sickly olive. His face stretched into an unholy grin 4 times its former width. He tilted his head, tilting her bloodied heart, and spoke in a voice that was both his own and something older, something vast. "Always yours." The forest around her rustled with movement, hundreds of tiny shapes, all glimmering eyes and snapping teeth. Nix laughed, a sound that became a chorus. Mara turned to run, but dozens of small hands shot from the undergrowth, grabbing at her ankles. She stumbled, fell into damp leaves, and looked up into Nix's face as he descended like a puppet master, surrounded by his legion. They crowded around her, pressing in. She raised her arms to protect herself, but it was no use. As claws reached for her, Nix knelt and whispered, "Friends forever," before the darkness swallowed her. When the police arrived the next morning, they found the yard empty save for a single muddy footprint leading into the woods and a tiny, jagged key clutched in the roots of an old oak tree. It vanished days later, without explanation. Some say on moonless nights, you can hear laughter echoing among the trees, high, tinkling, and all too familiar. And if you're brave, or foolish enough to follow it, you might find a strange goblin waiting with that same crooked smile, offering you friendship. Best not to answer. Title: The People Next Door. When Tessa bought the crumbling Victorian on Sycamore Street, she was desperate for a change. A bitter divorce, a job she no longer cared for, and a city that felt more like a tomb than a home, it all pushed her to find someplace quieter, slower. The small town of Meadow Hollow promised that: trees in neat rows, front porches with rocking chairs, smiling faces. The house was cheap, suspiciously so, but she chalked it up to age and the fact that it sat on the end of a cul-de-sac, away from the more popular parts of town. It needed work, sure, but it had charm, and more importantly, it was hers. On her second day there, she met the neighbors. They appeared at her door just after sunset, the sky still glowing orange. A man and a woman, smiling, polite. The man wore a bow tie and suspenders. The woman, a pale yellow dress that looked a bit too old-fashioned for Tessa's taste. "We just wanted to welcome you," said the woman, holding out a plate of cookies. "I'm Muriel. This is my husband, Thomas. We live next door." Tessa thanked them and smiled, though she was distracted by how still they were, like statues waiting for applause. Their eyes didn't move much, and when they did, they always moved together, like they were rehearsed. Muriel's hands trembled slightly as Tessa took the cookies. "We hope you'll stay a while," she said. Tessa laughed politely, and they left. The next morning, Tessa found one of the cookies split open on her counter, crawling with ants. But when she brushed them away and looked closer, she realized they weren't ants. They were beetles. Tiny black beetles, squirming and clicking inside the hollowed shell of the cookie like it had been baked that way. She threw the rest of the cookies in the trash and tried not to gag. She avoided the neighbors after that, which was harder than it should have been. Muriel and Thomas always seemed to be outside. They never waved, never spoke again. They just stared. From their porch, from behind half-closed blinds, from the hedges between their houses. One night, Tessa walked past her front window and saw their silhouettes, identical in posture, standing on their front lawn, facing her house. Not moving, not blinking, just waiting. She drew the curtains tight. The noises started a week later. Soft tapping at her back door. Whispers near her bedroom window. Once, she swore she heard breathing in the attic, but when she climbed up with a flashlight and hammer, she found nothing but old insulation and dead moths. Then came the gifts. First, a pair of child's shoes, neatly placed on her welcome mat. Old and scuffed, too small to fit anyone she knew. Then, a bundle of dried lavender tied with a length of knotted hair. Last, a photograph. Black and white, faded and curled at the edges. It showed a family standing in front of her house, 2 parents and a young girl. The girl looked exactly like Tessa. The parents were smiling. The man wore a bow tie and suspenders. The woman wore a pale yellow dress. The back of the photo read, "Welcome home." Tessa started digging. She visited the town library, combed through newspaper archives. It took days, but eventually, she found a headline from 1962, "Family Disappears in Meadow Hollow." The article described a couple, Thomas and Muriel Lane, and their adopted daughter, Tessa Line. All 3 vanished without a trace. The home sat vacant for years afterward. Then people started moving in. And dying. Quietly. Strangely. The woman before her, a reclusive widow, was found in her bathtub, all her teeth pulled out and placed in a neat circle around the drain. The couple before that? Poisoned by cookies. Tessa didn't sleep that night. The next evening, her power went out. No storm, no wind, just sudden, silent darkness. She lit a candle and sat in her living room, her breath coming shallow. That's when she heard the front door creak open. Not slam, not rattle, just open, like someone had a key. The candle flickered. She turned, holding it high. Muriel stood in the hallway. So did Thomas. They were wet, drenched though it hadn't rained. Their clothes hung heavy and glistening. Their skin sagged like wet paper. And their eyes, no longer glassy and polite, were dark holes leaking something thick and black. "You're home," Muriel said. Her voice echoed as if it came from somewhere deeper. Older. Thomas stepped forward, holding something in his pale hands, a tiny dress. Tessa's heart dropped. It was hers. From childhood. She hadn't seen it in years. "You left us," Thomas whispered. "You always leave us," said Muriel. "But you came back this time. That's all that matters." Tessa screamed and flung the candle, but the room was already filling with shadow. Not darkness, shadow. Thick, crawling, intelligent. She backed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, but the moment she turned, they were there again. Standing. Smiling. No one has seen Tessa since. Her car's still in the driveway. Her front door is always closed. But every night, if you walk down Sycamore Street and look just right, You'll see them through the lace curtains. Muriel, Thomas, and a young woman sitting between them at the dinner table. Smiling. They never move. They just wait for someone new to move in next door. Title: Below the Stairs. When Emma moved into the little brick house on Alder Street, she told herself she was ready for a fresh start. The divorce was finalized, the job was stable, and the house was manageable. It needed some TLC, but she liked its old charm, the creaky floors, the drafty windows, the whisper of history in the walls. Except for the basement. The realtor had mentioned it offhand, said it was unfinished, and quickly moved on. Emma only glanced at it during her first walk through. A heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway, shut tight, with a handle that seemed colder than the rest of the house. She didn't give it much thought. Until the first night. That was when she heard the knock. Not on the door. From beneath it. 3 slow, deliberate raps from the other side. Like someone gently knocking on the underside of a coffin lid. She froze, listening. The air felt heavier near the door, like standing too close to something ancient and asleep. She pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Probably the house settling, she thought. Or maybe rats. But the knocking returned the next night. And the one after. By the 4th night, Emma was beginning to lose sleep. She started leaving the hallway light on, as if that would help. She piled a few chairs in front of the basement door. The knocks grew louder, sometimes scratching, sometimes tapping. And one time, something that sounded like breathing. Heavy, raspy, like it came from lungs that hadn't tasted air in years. She finally broke down and called a contractor. I just want to seal it off, she told him. Concrete over the door. I never use the basement anyway. The contractor, a grizzled man in his 60s, stepped inside and instantly frowned. Ma'am, he said, squinting toward the back hallway. Was this place built in the 40s? Yeah. Why? He scratched his chin. You know, a lot of these old houses have, false floors. Especially in basements. Panic shelters, bootlegging spaces. That kind of thing. Okay. I mean, you ever actually been down there? Emma shook her head. He whistled. You should. Before we seal anything. Never know what you're walling up. He smiled when he said it, but there was something off about his eyes. Like he didn't mean it as advice, more like a warning. That night, Emma sat in front of the basement door for a long time. No knocking. No breathing. Just silence. And curiosity. At 2:17 a.m., she opened the door. It groaned like it hadn't moved in years. The air that spilled out was cold, and not the kind of cold from poor insulation. It was deep, earthy, like the breath of something buried too long. Her flashlight flickered as she stepped onto the wooden stairs, which creaked beneath her with every step. Dust motes swirled in the beam. The basement was as expected. Concrete floor, stone walls, a few broken shelves, some forgotten furniture draped in yellowed sheets. But then she saw it. A square outline on the floor. A hatch. She knelt and brushed away the dust. The hatch was old, metal, and bolted shut, but the bolts had long since rusted through. With effort, she pried it open. A ladder descended into pure blackness. No dirt. No insulation. Just a narrow shaft that went straight down. She hesitated, then pointed the flashlight into the hole. It only illuminated the first 5 rungs of the ladder. Everything beyond that was swallowed in a thick, oily blackness. That's when she noticed something. The rungs of the ladder were wet. Not damp. Wet. As if someone or something had just climbed up. Then came the whisper. Don't close the door. It didn't come from the hole. It came from behind her. Emma spun around, no one there. She backed toward the stairs, heart racing. But as she turned to flee, the flashlight flickered and died. And the basement door slammed shut above her. The next morning, the mailman noticed the front door to the house was ajar. Emma's car was still in the driveway. Her coffee cup was still half full on the kitchen table. But Emma was gone. The only clue was the basement door, wide open, chairs tossed aside, and a single trail of wet footprints leading up from the darkness and stopping in the center of the hallway. No one has been able to find that contractor again. And no one who's gone into that basement has come back quite right. They always say the same thing. Don't close the door. It gets angry when it's shut in. So, if you ever hear knocking beneath your feet late at night, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't open the hatch. Title: Never After Dark. They say our town rolls up its streets by 9 p.m. But that's not quite true. It's not about the stores, or the people, or the streetlights dimming to conserve power. It's something older. Stranger. Where I'm from, you don't leave your house after dark. Not even to check the mail. Not even to take the trash out. Not unless you want it to find you. My parents raised me with the rule: never open the door after sundown. Not to neighbors. Not to police. Not even to family. Once the sun's down, my mother used to whisper, locking the deadbolt with shaking hands, "What's outside isn't meant to be seen." I used to think they were paranoid. Until the night it happened to Mr. Halvorson. He was the type who laughed at warnings. Loud. Big. Ex-military. He lived 2 doors down and made a show of leaving his porch light off every night, just to prove nothing was out there. One evening, just after 10, I watched from my bedroom window as he stepped outside, grumbling about his trash bins. He stood there in his slippers, stretching and yawning. Then he stopped. Just froze. Like something in the dark had reached out and caught him. I couldn't see anything, but he did. His face twisted, his mouth opened in a scream I couldn't hear, and then he was gone. Not snatched. Not dragged. Just gone. Like someone flipped a switch and erased him. His trash can rolled into the street, still spinning. The police came the next day. They knocked on doors, took statements. I told them he went out at night. That I saw it. One of the officers paled and muttered, another one. After that, they stopped asking questions. That was 3 years ago. And the disappearances never made the news. No one talks about them outside of town. Hell, we don't even talk about them inside town anymore. But we all follow the rule. Never open the door after dark. It gets worse in winter. Nights come sooner. Shadows stretch longer. You start hearing things. Sounds you can't place, scraping, footsteps, the distant sound of breathing right outside your window, even though you live alone. Last December, I made the mistake of looking through the peephole after midnight. I wish I hadn't. There was something on my porch. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Its limbs were too long, its skin too pale, and its mouth, God, that mouth, it smiled like it had never known pain, only hunger. And it stared. Right into the peephole. Right at me. It didn't knock. It just waited. I stayed by the door until sunrise. When the light hit the porch, it was gone. Not a trace. Not a footprint. Just a faint wet mark, like something had pressed its face against the wood. Some folks say it's a punishment. A curse passed down from something we angered. Others think it's a thing. A predator that hunts only in darkness, only in this town. But no one knows for sure. They only know the rule. And they follow it. Even the children. So, if you ever find yourself here, just passing through or renting a cheap place because the price seemed too good to be true, let me tell you this. Once the sun sets, stay inside. Close the curtains. Lock the doors. Don't answer knocks. Don't check noises. Don't let the curiosity win. Because once you cross that threshold into the night, it sees you. And once it sees you, it never stops hunting. Title: The Goddess in the Mirror. There's a story we used to whisper in the dorms, late at night, when the lights were low and the shadows crept in along the walls. It was about a goddess, Kavatra, the Death Mother. Not a skeleton in a robe or some reaper with a scythe. No, this was older. Much older. Something cruel. Divine. They said she wasn't worshipped. She was appeased. Her legend wasn't in books, not really. You had to know where to look. Footnotes in banned grimoires, fragments in forgotten languages, scratched into the base of tombs no one visits anymore. Always the same warning. She comes when you see her. She sees when you speak her name. And once she knows you exist, you don't stop dying. It started as a dare. My friend Lucas found some post online, half creepypasta, half ritual, and decided we needed to try it. Just for laughs. A little thrill. The steps were simple. 1. Wait until 3:03 a.m. 2. Turn off every light. 3. Look into a mirror by candlelight. 4. Say her name 7 times. Kavatra, goddess of the dying breath. 5. Wait. We didn't believe it. Of course we didn't. But we were 19, bored, and a little high. We followed the steps exactly. And at first nothing. We laughed, joked. Lucas even blew out the candle for dramatic effect. But just as we turned away, the mirror whispered. It didn't echo. It didn't crack. It whispered. A voice like insects crawling through ash. I see you. After that night, things started to go wrong. Lucas was the first. He began sleepwalking, then stopped sleeping altogether. He said something followed him in his dreams, a woman made of funeral veils, towering and thin, her face blank except for a gaping mouth that dripped black water. One morning, I found him staring into the mirror, unmoving, his eyes rolled back, mouth hanging open like he was trying to scream inward. He never came back to class. 2 days later, he jumped in front of a train. I tried to forget. Told myself it was just coincidence, trauma. But then it came for me. Every mirror in my apartment began warping. Not visibly, but subtly. Reflections were delayed, wrong, twisted by milliseconds. I'd see things moving behind me that weren't there when I turned around. My own eyes blinking when I hadn't. And then I started hearing her. She didn't speak. She sang. A lullaby in some dying tongue. It came from the bathroom mirror at night. From puddles on the street. From my spoon, my phone screen, even the surface of my coffee. Anything that could reflect became her mouth. I stopped looking. I smashed every mirror. Turned off my phone. Covered windows in tinfoil. But it wasn't enough. Because I'd already seen her. Last night, I woke up to find the candles lit again. I never relit them. I haven't owned candles since that night. But there they were, 7 flames flickering gently in a circle around my bed. And in the corner of the room stood her, tall as the ceiling. Limbs too long, like a marionette made of silk and bones. Her skin was the color of Graves oil. Her face was mine, rotted and pale, staring back with hollow sockets that wept blood. She opened her arms and I felt something inside me unravel. You called. You saw. Now die forever. I don't know how I escaped. Maybe she's playing with me. Maybe death, to her, isn't quick. Maybe it's forever. Not a moment, but a process, a peeling away of time, of soul, one night at a time. I can't sleep. I can't dream. She's in every reflection. In the puddles, the windows, the sheen of my own eyes. I see her even when I close them. Please, if you find this, don't look in the mirror after dark. Don't say her name. Don't search her. Because once she knows you, you never stop dying.